Good afternoon, and welcome to week 6 of 8 of our Faculty Perspective series. All summer long, faculty from around campus have illustrated the cutting-edge research done at the UO by faculty who are leaders in their respective disciplines. Most have also highlighted the exciting courses they teach, many of those for first-year students. What we have shown you is just a small glimpse of what's ahead for you at the University of Oregon, and how the bar for learning and scholarship is now raised for you as a college student. If you're a student watching this, remember to complete your reflection on this program after we're done so you remain on track to complete introduction. To do so, visit community.uoregon.edu. Also, for your students who are watching live, we want to make sure that you ask our faculty members questions during the course of the presentation. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask your questions of our faculty members who have been really eager to answer your questions during the last portion of each one of these programs. So today's last program of our Innovation and Entrepreneurship track, Professor Nicole Dahmen asks, what if journalism reported solutions in addition to reporting problems? Welcome, Dr. Dahmen.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad to be here today. I appreciate you all having me. My name is Nicole Dahmen. I'm an associate professor at the School of Journalism and Communication, and I study, teach, and practice journalism. So today I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit about special courses that we offer in the J School in the areas of solutions journalism. But before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit more about journalism more broadly, and I'll be talking about my research as we go through my slides this afternoon. So as Cora said, the title of my presentation is, What if Journalism Reported Solutions in Addition to Reporting Problems? So before we get too deep into that, let's just briefly talk about what is journalism. And I know that you all see journalism, you hear journalism, especially in the summer of 2020, right? There's a lot going on right now that you're hearing about and seeing about and reading about in the news. But maybe you've never thought about a formal definition of journalism before. Well, there's lots of different ways to define it, but a journalism definition that I really like is this one. So the gathering, assessing, and presenting of news and information, right? So a journalist doesn't just go out there and start writing a story. The first step in reporting is to go out there and gather information. So looking at documents, observations, interviews, observing what's happening in our communities, going to school board meetings, interviewing the governor, listening to community members in your area. And so journalists go out there and they collect information. Then they have to assess that information. And so one of the important things that's so critical about journalism is that credible journalists are actively assessing the credibility, the veracity, or the truth of that information. So just because somebody tells a journalist something doesn't automatically make it true or mean that it's newsworthy. So a critical function of journalism is actually assessing information to see whether or not it's reasonable, credible, and trustworthy. And then journalists finally put that information out into the media, either in the form of a written story, right, a broadcast, or an audio story, a podcast, or even maybe a Facebook video or a Zoom video like you're watching me on today. So again, journalism is that act of gathering, assessing, and presenting news and information. So when you all think, what is journalism, you might think CNN, right? CNN is a common what we would call a channel or a well-known channel of journalism and news and information. So this is a screen capture that I grabbed of CNN over the weekend. So take a second and just kind of scan through the headlines of this CNN webpage. What do you notice in common about so many of these stories? What do they have in common? Give you a second to think about that. So we've got satellite images of a blast in Beirut. We've got quarantining students in Mississippi. We have got, having trouble reading it, grocery prices spiking, right? So what all those stories have in common, unfortunately, is they're bad stuff, right? We think of them as problems. It's depressing. So yeah, journalism does report on a lot of problems. And yeah, it's depressing. But why is it necessary? Why is it necessary that journalism report on so many problems? Again, I'm going to give you a second to think about that. Well, it's necessary because journalism has that critical role of bringing information to audiences to help us make the best possible decisions that we possibly can about our lives, our communities, our societies, and our governments. So we rely on journalists to bring us credible information about what's happening in the world, right? I live in Eugene, Oregon. I can't be in Washington, D.C., or even in our capital here in Oregon, Salem, every day to observe personally what's happening with government and politics. And so I rely on journalists to bring me that information so that I can make good decisions. Right now, you all are probably trying to make a lot of decisions about COVID and related information. And so you need to get data and information from journalists to help you make good, safe health decisions about how to respond to COVID. And so again, a reality is that we need to know about the problems in the world so that we can make good decisions. So what are some of the effects of all that bad news? Well, I know that when you see so much bad news, you probably feel stressed. You probably feel very worried. You might even feel helpless or hopeless. And reality is, yeah, the news is depressing. It does make us feel bad, and it does make people turn off the news. We know that fewer people are watching the news because it's so depressing. And so some of my research actually looks at why audiences disengage from the news. But here's the deal. The bad news is only part of the story, okay? Bad news isn't all of journalism. And so one of the things that we do here at the University of Oregon in the School of Journalism is we actually teach students to report the whole story. And that's a hashtag. If you're interested in hashtags, you can search through that, especially on Twitter. But the whole story encourages us and reminds us that the bad news, the problems, are only part of the story. And so for journalism to actively gather, assess, and present information, we can't just report the problem. We've also got to report the solution. And so at the University of Oregon, I study and teach solutions journalism. And I'm going to give you a formal definition in a second, but before I do that, I'm going to let some of my students explain to you all what solutions journalism is.
I think solutions journalism is just part of doing good work.
Kind of uncovering the truths around you, but also questioning them a little bit further and seeing what our power is as journalists to kind of produce a more complex discourse, I guess, about issues that are all around us.
How we're actually solving a problem rather than just looking at what the problem is and the positive and negative aspects of each solution.
I'm particularly passionate about finding people who are helping and people who are in need of help. And solutions journalism really focuses on the merging of those two people and where organizations and problems come together.
So I think my students there did a really good job of explaining some of the principles of solutions journalism. And in that video, you saw several students who I've worked with in the past couple of years, and they produced and filmed that video right inside of Allen Hall, which is the location of the School of Journalism and Communication here at UO. So again, what is solutions journalism? Well, as we talked about earlier this afternoon, most news stories stop after the problem. But solutions journalism gives us this more complete coverage by also looking at responses to the problem. And so we know some of the biggest problems facing our society today: absolutely COVID, racial injustice, police brutality, homelessness, climate change, right? Those are all big, major problems. But the story doesn't end there. Solutions journalism shows that we can't just report on the problem, we also have to report on responses to the problem. And so a more formal definition of solutions journalism is rigorous news stories about credible solutions to serious societal problems. Solutions journalism has actually been around for decades. And so maybe you're wondering, well, why don't we hear more about it? Why don't we see more reporting about responses to problems? We have been teaching solutions journalism here at the University of Oregon for about 4 years, and we're actually one of the leading institutions of the research, teaching, and practice of solutions journalism. We actually have students working across the country now who have studied solutions journalism with us, and it's really exciting to see their solutions journalism being brought to audiences, not just here in Oregon, but actually across the country and even across the globe. So let's take a look at a few solution stories. So check out this headline, right? Vietnam took drastic early action to fight the coronavirus and has reported 0 deaths. That's right. Vietnam has had no deaths thus far from COVID. And so this article really digs in and gives a lot of details about what Vietnam did specifically to have this 0 death rate. This next article is similar in terms of how did one nursing home in Maryland have no COVID cases? How did they do it? And so solutions journalism tells us that, yeah, COVID's a problem, but there are also people out there actively working to fight the virus and to come up with solutions. And some places, some parts of the country, and some parts of the globe are doing really well at containing the virus. This story actually looks at Native American communities in South Dakota and reports on how one Native American tribe in South Dakota is protecting its tribe from COVID. And so again, these are all examples of solution stories. So why do solutions journalism? What's the point of solutions journalism? Well, as we just said, the whole story isn't the problem. The problem is important, but it's also important that audiences know about credible, effective responses to problems, right? We need to know what's going wrong, but we also need to know what's going right. And we need to know about the people who are working hard to fight against those problems. We also know from a journalistic perspective that solutions journalism is just good journalism. Okay? It's not advocacy, it's not problem solving, it's just good journalism in reporting the entire story. So if you decide to take a journalism course at the University of Oregon, one of the first things that you'll learn about reporting is to go out there and gather information about who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are what we call the 5 W's and the H. We teach those in any basic reporting class. That's part of the story. But solutions journalism reminds us that it's not the whole story, and so that 7th W is what's possible. Solutions journalism reminds us that we also need to ask about responses and possibility in covering the problem. Another reason to report solutions journalism is that it can actually have greater impact as well as audience engagement. So what does impact mean? Well, technically, impact may mean 2 things colliding, right? Like 2 cars, had an impact at a traffic stop or something like that. But when we're talking about impact in the context of journalism, we're actually talking about, did that story make a difference? Did people talk about the story? Did elected leaders respond to the story? Did any sort of policy change happen because of what was reported in the story and either uncovering a problem or reporting on a solution? And so it's critically important that journalists are really thinking about and audiences are thinking about the impact of these stories that we see reported in the news. Solutions journalism can have greater impact than, say, a problem-based story. Solutions journalism can also lead to greater audience engagement. So what does that mean? Well, that basically means that audiences who read solution stories are more interested in sharing those stories than problem stories. Those audiences also look for more stories by news outlets who are covering solutions. Audiences also spend more time on the page with solution stories than they do with problem stories. And equally important, audiences report greater feelings of self-efficacy and optimism. Well, you probably know that optimism means positive thinking, right? So people who read solution stories or listen to them or view them tend to feel more positive after the solution stories as opposed to the problem stories. And they also report higher levels of self-efficacy. that may be a new term for you, but that basically just means that the audience member feels like he or she or they could actually go out there and make a difference and contribute to problem solving. So essentially, after listening, watching, or reading a solution story, audience members feel better and they feel like they can go out there and make a difference. And that's positive news, not just for journalism, but also for communities and for our functioning democracy here in the United States. So what are the characteristics of solutions journalism? I can sit up here and I can say, well, solutions journalism reports on responses to problems. Yes, but there's some very specific details that we want to make sure solutions journalism includes, and those are the kind of things that you will learn about in our solutions journalism courses here at UO. So most obvious, the solutions journalism story is going to report on the response. So how does it work? What is it? What are the details of that response? So if we take a serious problem like homelessness, right? Homelessness is a major problem facing our society today. What is the response to helping to solve the homeless crisis? Well, is it tiny homes? Is it housing first? Is it helping people find houses through social service programs? The solution story is going to detail that response and really give the particulars about how it works, including evidence, right? These are not just opinion pieces. These are data-driven pieces that show that these responses actually have evidence indicating that they work. The solution story is also going to give insight about the response, so giving some really specific details about how that response works. And that can help audiences learn to implement their response in their community, and it can help decision makers and other elected leaders learn more about that particular problem response. And finally, the solution story is also going to report on limitations. Well, we might know that something is a solution because of X, Y, and Z, but what happens if you introduce some sort of caveat to it? Well, the solution story is going to also report on the limitations of that particular response. Let's also talk about what isn't solutions journalism. So solutions journalism is not sort of quick fixes, feel-good fluff, or advocacy, right? Solutions journalism has to document evidence-based responses. And it's not just positive or happy news, right? There's lots of good, positive, happy news in journalism, and we need that. But solution stories are what we call rigorous stories that report on real problems, right? These aren't stories that help you fix dinner in 5 minutes or less, right? These are stories that help us solve or respond to some of the biggest problems facing our society today. It's also important to understand that this journalism is not advocacy. Okay? It's not saying, here's the best solution, go do this. It's saying, here's what one community did to address this particular problem. Okay? Again, it's not pointing to any particular solution, and it's not saying, here, go do this. What it's telling us instead is, there's a problem, but there are also people working to solve that problem. And so that's where that hashtag, the whole story, comes in. It gives audiences that more complete picture, not just of the problem, but also of the solution. So can young people like yourselves learn to do solutions journalism? Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, at the University of Oregon, we've been teaching solutions journalism now for about 4 years, and we're actually one of the few institutions across the country to teach solutions journalism, which is one of the exciting things about our J School here at the University of Oregon. We're actually nationally known for our programs and research and teaching of solutions journalism. And so we bring solutions journalism into our journalism classrooms. And so I said a second ago, we've been teaching solutions journalism for about 4 years, and we teach solutions journalism through something called the Catalyst Journalism Project. I know the photos in this slide are kind of small, but you can see there over on the left side of the photo the logo for our Catalyst Journalism Project. And this was a wall display that was put in place in Allen Hall last year, and it featured some of our faculty and students and student work, as well as the awards that we have won for our solutions reporting. And this is, again, a really unique, innovative program that we offer here at the J School. And what's especially interesting about our program is we combine solutions journalism with investigative reporting, which is also critically important. I'm happy to take questions at the end about investigative reporting if you all want to talk about that. But this wall display featured some of our student work, including our award-winning issue of OR Magazine. OR Magazine is a digital iPad and phone publication course that we teach here at the J School, and our students have done 2 solutions issues of OR Magazine, and both of those issues of OR Magazine have won national awards. And what I like about this display here is it shows you some of the different types of stories that our students have reported on solutions journalism. So that top story on the left was a story about female farmers and a female farming network. The next story looked at equal education for LGBTQ plus students here in Oregon. Another story looked at the conflict that ranchers have with wolves. Another story looked at ways to combat teen pregnancy. And then another story looked at, sorry, I went too quickly, looked at legal marijuana as a solution for PTSD for veterans. So these are all examples of solution stories that were reported by our students here at the J School at UO. And again, students won awards for these stories. Here's another example of some of the stories that our students have reported, and this one features Taylor Purse. You can see Taylor's photo down there at the bottom. Taylor graduated last year, and now she's a reporter for Eugene Weekly, and she is out there winning more awards for her investigative and solutions reporting. This particular slide features another one of our students, Michael Tobin. Michael just graduated this past June from the J School, and he was the editor of the student paper here, as well as one of our award-winning solutions and investigative journalists. Michael is now working for Bloomberg News this summer as an intern. So I hope you enjoyed learning about solutions journalism. If you would like to learn more about this, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of this presentation today. And of course, you can always reach out to me by email. But I hope that you feel a little bit more optimistic after watching this about what's happening with journalism and news today. And the key things to remember is that there are a lot of problems in the world, and journalism has a responsibility to report those problems. But there are also people out there working to solve those problems, and journalism has an equal responsibility to tell that whole story. And it's a real honor to be able to research and teach solutions journalism here at the University of Oregon.
Thank you so much. We have time for questions, and so I want to make sure that we get to them. We have a few here already, and hopefully we'll have some more rolling in. Bella wants to know, are there any courses dedicated to solutions journalism with a focus on the environment?
Great question, Bella. So our questions, the courses that we have right now, we offer 2 courses in solutions journalism. And in those courses, you are able to pursue any topic that you wish. So if you are passionate about the environment, or let's say you're an environmental science major and you also want to study journalism, absolutely, we welcome the opportunity to explore solutions reporting through all of your interests.
Thank you. Ryan wants to know, how do you feel journalism will change in the future? What will be more emphasized in reports? What role has COVID-19 played in the presentation of journalism reports?
Ryan, that's a great question, and you are asking some of the most important questions facing the journalism industry today. One of the things that's critically important to journalism right now is the financial model that journalism has been based on, and there are a lot of problems with that financial model. But the upside of that is that we are seeing a lot of evidence that what I was just talking about, solutions journalism, can actually, as I said, increase impact and increase engagement, which drives audiences to solution stories, which makes more people want to tune in, read, subscribe, as well as getting nonprofit subscription and funder support for journalism. So Ryan, you asked such an important question, and I think the biggest changes that we're going to see in the future are, first of all, more in-depth reporting with impact and changed financial models, as well as greater use of solutions journalism across the news industries.
Thank you. Bella also has another question. Could solutions journalism include reporting what audience members / readers could do to help?
Great. Again, I really like the way you're thinking about that, Bella. And what you're really starting to talk about there is what we call engaged journalism. So engaged journalism really puts audiences at the center of the reporting. And absolutely, with this engaged solutions journalism perspective, we want audiences to feel empowered to know how they can go out there and make a difference. And so what we see is many of the students coming into our journalism school are very interested in journalism and want to pursue the mass media fields, but they're turned off by how negative and problem-based journalism is. And so we find that our students are genuinely excited and optimistic about the future of journalism when we explain to them about solutions journalism and this perspective of telling the whole story.
In hearing you, I'm going to insert my own question because I can. But in hearing your presentation, I think of the stories that I have heard even from my own folks who talk about how journalism has changed and how nobody trusts journalism anymore. And do you see that solutions-based journalism might restore that kind of trust that folks who are perhaps a little bit older once had in the people that they watched or the news stories that they read?
Right. That's a great question. And that loss of trust from news audiences is another big problem facing journalism today. And it's a really complex, multifaceted question, and there's a lot of reasons that trust has declined. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. Some of the research, again, that we're doing here at UO has shown that this solutions-based approach to reporting can help audiences to connect with the news as well as to have greater trust in the journalists who are reporting the solution story and in the journalism industry more broadly.
Thank you. Kendallin wants to know why is solutions journalism not a more common practice?
It's a great question. Really good questions. I'm impressed with the thoughtfulness of these. Part of the reason solutions journalism you don't hear about it more broadly is because right now journalism is what do I want to say? It's facing, again, a lot of problems, including financial problems, as well as this declining trust that we just talked about. But what we are seeing is more younger people coming into newsrooms who are trained in this solutions-based approach, as well as have a greater multimedia focus, have more sort of social media training, know more about connecting with audiences, and know how to tell engaging stories in a diverse and meaningful way. And so what we're seeing there is a greater spread of these practices as new generations come into the newsroom. And again, since we started teaching solutions journalism 4 years ago, we have seen a much bigger spread across universities across the United States, as well as the spread of solution stories. If you want to read more solution stories, you can visit our website, which is the UO Catalyst program at the University of Oregon, and we have a lot of solution stories on our website, and I'm happy to provide some additional links to solution stories.
Thank you for that. I actually want to see if there's a way. I'm always interested in the connections that students who may not be in the School of Journalism and Communication, or who may be seeing themselves as advertising or PR majors. Is there a connection that they can make to solutions journalism in this way that could also help in their learning and their future career paths?
It's a great question. So earlier we talked about declining trust in the news media. Part of the reason that we have some declining trust in the news media is because of lack of media literacy in audiences. Audiences don't know how to always decipher real, credible, professional journalism from the garbage you might see on Facebook or someplace else. And so one of the things that we teach at the School of Journalism and Communication to all of our majors, as well as in our general education courses that you might take as an economics major or a biology major or a music or dance major, is increasing your news and media literacy. So to learn more about being a critical news consumer, and again, recognizing what is credible professional news from all of that other stuff. And so that's one of the things that you could learn about, again, even if you're not a journalism major. And certainly we talk about this content with our public relations and advertising and media studies majors as well.
Thank you. Dimitri wants to know, why does there seem to be more news focusing on problems than solutions or or response to those problems.
So again, we don't want to deny the fact that there's a lot of problems in our society. There are a lot of problems in society, and we need to be informed about them so that we can make good decisions, right? Let's say we have elected leaders who don't support education or they don't support the environment, and we think that's a problem. We need to know the decisions that they are making so that we can respond as citizens. And so we need to know about the problems. But again, we are starting to see more and more solutions-based reporting, but unfortunately, it just doesn't take sort of that headline position. So if you're really only scanning the headlines or catching like the Daily or something like that, you might not see as many of those solution stories. So you have to dig a little bit deeper sometimes to find those solution stories. But something else I want to add, again, the media industries are one of the most powerful industries in society today, and it's critically important as a college student, as an educated person, that you are learning about the mass media. So even if you might not want to become a journalist or an advertising or public relations specialist, it's really important to learn about how the media industries operate so that you can be an informed citizen, because here in the United States, you are participating either actively as a citizen or as someone visiting or living in the United States in our democracy.
How does the way that the concentration of media companies, that there are fewer owners of papers and news stations and so on, how does that impact the way that journalism is either problem-oriented or solutions-oriented?
That's a great question. So what we're talking about here is the fact that there is limited corporate ownership of a lot of the news media industries today. And so that means that we're often seeing sort of the same news recycled over and over and over. But the upside here is that because of digital technologies and social media, we are not just exposed to news that comes from our community. So I read the Register Guard, which is our local Eugene newspaper, and they do a great job, but I'm also able to read news from New York City, from my hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, from Denmark, from across East Asia, right? I can get news from across the globe because of digital technologies and social media. And so if you want to find solution stories, they are absolutely out there. And there are now some news outlets that are specializing entirely in solutions reporting. There's a news magazine called Yes Magazine. It's YES, exclamation point. And one of our recent graduates, Isabella Garcia, works for Yes Magazine. And Yes Magazine reports entirely solution stories. The New York Times also runs a column called the Fixes column that is entirely solution stories, as well as, again, publications across Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. So they're out there. They just take a little bit more digging.
Thank you. Julia wants to know, are there journalism courses relating to the environment for students who are not studying journalism and would just like to take a course supplementing their own major?
Yeah, absolutely, Julia. Great question. We have a program at the J School called Science and Memory that focuses entirely on climate change reporting as well as creative communications regarding climate change and tackling climate change. So that's an ongoing program that we have. We also have courses. We taught courses last year in rivers and understanding rivers from a mass media ecological perspective. So yes, to answer that question, Julia, we do offer a lot of courses about the environment in regard to the mass media industries.
Thank you. Okay, one of the things that we've had several of your colleagues do these in recent weeks, even today. Troy Elias was here. We had Chris Chavez here. And I know that they're part of a transformative experience that many students within the School of Journalism and Communication have, the NYC trip. Are there other kinds of, you just actually, I think, mentioned one that I think can be transformative. Are there, what kinds of transformative experiences can students have in this field that are part of the programs that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I mentioned earlier our Catalyst Journalism project that I run with my colleague Brent Walth at the J School. And in that project, we have students doing specialized reporting on solutions journalism. But we also have some really cool opportunities as part of that program. In addition to getting real-world publications and bylines, we also have funding available to help pay for your reporting expenses if you need to travel to Portland or Eastern Oregon or someplace else to report your story. Our students have also won a lot of awards through participation in that program, and then we take students on trips as well as part of that program. So we have taken students to Chicago to the Data Investigative Reporting Conference. We took students last year to Houston to the Investigative Reporting Conference. A year ago, we took students to the Solutions Journalism Conference, which was actually held at the Sundance Ranch outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, which is gorgeous. And this summer, we were planning to take students to Washington, D.C. for the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference, but we're going to go virtual instead. So again, we do have a lot of opportunities for students to get out-of-class opportunities as part of our Solutions Journalism program.
Thank you so much. You mentioned a particular alumnus of the U of O, Isabella. Is that how she was able to connect with Yes?
Yes, absolutely. So Isabella ran through our solutions, not ran through, but she took, we call it run through. She took our solutions journalism and our Catalyst workshop course, and she learned about solutions journalism. And she was actually also a student in the Clark Honors College here, and she wrote her senior honors thesis about solutions journalism and landed that job at Yes Magazine. We also have another student who just graduated about a year and a half ago named Kenny Jacoby, who now works for the USA Today reporting network. And he just reported this incredible 4-part series that had a solutions journalism component to it that has been incredibly impactful. And he is also winning some awards for his solutions journalism work. So we are really seeing students get great reporting experience here, as well as cutting edge jobs in the journalism industry, in part because they're learning this forward thinking solutions reporting approach.
Thank you so much. We have to ask, because we were asking all of our faculty members this question, how can students engage with your research?
Great. So, well, I run a blog that has my research on my blog, and then I, of course, talk about my research in my coursework, and I love talking about research. I also run our honors program at the School of Journalism and Communication, where you have lots of opportunities to dig in and do research. And then as part of the Catalyst program, we also have students working on us with research. As a matter of fact, one of our students, Erin Hampton, who was working with us on solutions journalism, traveled to Prague in the Czech Republic to report and present her research on solutions journalism. So if you want to learn more about the research we're doing, I would suggest you check out my blog or our Catalyst Journalism website.
Thank you. Well, this is a practical question, too. Okay. You mentioned podcasts. Okay. What type of studios or facilities do journalism students have access to? And I think this could go beyond podcast studios, but what else do students have access to in terms of ways to facilitate this kind of journalism?
Well, you're absolutely right that journalism today is very much about technology and new forms of presenting information. And so we do have a beautiful, lovely podcast studio. We also have a television studio. We have audio-visual rooms. And then we also have an entire social media laboratory all right on the first floor of Allen Hall, as well as some really amazing computer labs all across Allen Hall. And then this massive equipment room. I'm still kind of in awe of our equipment room that our students have access to check out cameras, recording equipment, editing equipment, as well as access to all the digital suites, Photoshop, beyond.
Thank you. Can you remind us one more time the classes that you teach and that students may potentially be able to take from you?
So I teach a range of courses across the School of Journalism and Communication. I teach our Intro to Mass Media Ethics course. That's one of our bigger courses that has about 150 students in it. So that's a fun course that I enjoy teaching that I hope to see some of you in the future. I also teach reporting classes as well as the Solutions Journalism and Catalyst workshop courses that we've been discussing this afternoon, as well as running our honors program, and I teach courses in our honors program as well.
Thank you for that. That is all the time that we have this afternoon. As I'm wrapping up this session, I think it's really important that to remind you students that it's time to submit your photo for your UOID if you haven't already. We're hoping to mail you your student ID before you move in so that you're ready to go from the very first moments that you're on campus in September. And we're about to mail out our first batch here in a few days, and it's always really fun and exciting to see students and their excitement about getting their University of Oregon student ID, because once you're a duck, you're always a duck, and that is certainly the official way to know that you are a duck. So please submit your selfie at uocard.uoregon.edu. If you have questions about this or any other introduction program, visit our website at orientation.uoregon.edu. You can also email your questions to orientation@uoregon.edu, and you can text us your questions at 541-346-1159. Thank you to those of you who are watching with us live and certainly afterward. Thank you for your time today. I'm hopeful that your advising and registration experiences are going really well, and that you are as excited as we are to join us in the fall. We're really excited about fall term to start. So, and to you, Dr. Dahmen, thank you so much for your time and your insight today, and for helping all of our new ducks get ready for fall.
Thank you.